we're really grateful to our community for making avenues for supporting artists to do this exact work. So, I'm super jazzed. So often, Ty and I were just talking about this, that so often we don't get to do like a pre-launch event where we celebrate a book ahead of the time that it's actually out in the world. So in some ways, this feels really unique and special, and kind of already speaks to the way that this anthology that we're going to be talking about does talk about the past, the present, and the future. So there's a lot of things that, a lot of poems that carry the past in this anthology, poems that have been taught in classrooms for a long time, poems that have spoken to a lot of kids already, and then also poems that are new and speak to present times, and poems that also project the future as well. So this is Witness that we'll be talking about. So tonight's going to look like me hopefully getting out of the way after a minute here, and then Ty's going to read, Kyle's going to read, and then, or Ty's going to read, I'm going to read, and then Kyle's going to read, and then we're going to have a little conversation over here. But yeah, so without further ado, let me, I'm going to introduce Ty, I'm sorry, my brain is a little bit all over the place tonight, but okay, here we go. But back to Witness for just a second. I sometimes assume that people know about this, and then I remember there's folks in the room that maybe haven't heard about Witness. But Witness is an anthology that's written in, that poets, we invited over, or nearly 40 poets to address the past and present and future of policing. So this is an anthology and discussion around policing in the ways that maybe are most familiar to us in Minneapolis right now, but also policing in kind of more of a broader abstract sense too. So this anthology has poems that address the body, or poems that address various forms of policing, whether it's censorship or censorship of reading and that kind of thing. So we have a lot of different themes that are showing up in this anthology. And then we also have an Emmy-winning artist who did original art, David Davis, who did art by hand. So we have a number of pieces of his in the anthology as well. All right, so let me get out of the way. I'm going to introduce Ty, who's going to read. So Ty Chapman, the co-editor of this anthology with me, is an award-winning author and poet based in Minnesota. He's the author of many children's books and the poetry collection. I'm so not Greek enough. Tartarus, thank you. I'm like 1% Greek. Okay. He has published poems through the Academy of American Poets, Waterstone, and more, and Ty has received fellowships from Chapman, the Center for the Arts and Social Justice, the Loft Literary Center, and the Chapman Foundation. He holds an MFA in writing for children and young adults through the Vermont College of Fine Arts. I'm so glad to work with on this anthology. It's been kind of a dream that's lasted for a lot of years, and it's almost coming out in September into reality. So I'm grateful for you all, and take us away.
Test. Okay. Can you all hear me if I project about so? Does that feel okay?
You want the mic off?
Oh, that's such a good point. Thank you. Thank you for catching that. All right, then I will figure this out.
It's a little the twist. If you twist the middle, yep, then you can tilt it and slide it up and down.
Nice. Okay. Brief intermission. All right, howdy gang. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Ty. As already said, I co-edited this anthology. It was an absolute dream to work on, a dream that lasted longer than either of us had anticipated it ever would. I'm going to read a couple of poems for y'all today, one of which will be my contribution to the anthology. The others are kind of some loosies that I've either published through literary magazines or haven't seen the light of day, and you get to be the lucky few who read them. This first poem is about the experience of a black body moving through America, and how Minnesota rather, is not all that different from Texas in that way. I think of Texas when I leave Minneapolis for rural Midwest. Every dirt road is a homecoming running so much Americana. Blood runs this Americana. Watering soil blackberries bloom from. It watered soil down in Jasper after Bird was offered a truck ride home. After Bird was off so close to home, our car hit the highway, a bullet, highwayed to distant matter. We soar till touching something solid. We soar till we touch a new home. But nothing blooms through paved asphalt. Nothing blooms and the same waters flow here. Every dirt road, homecoming. Thank you. Yes, it is okay to snap, to clap, to do whatever speaks to you. We are at a poetry reading, not at a funeral. It is okay to interact with the art. This next one is a direct response to an interview I saw that Jean-Michel Basquiat gave. That is the only context that we need here. The title is there any anger in you, in your work? Yeah, of course there is. What are you angry about? I don't remember. Jean-Michel, I ache sometimes to sing Inferno, flood the sun, radiant lotus and oil slick skyline. Make terrors know this dark they fear so dearly. I want to know if the moon might better nurture her children. If it's not too late to reknow tenderness. We know the weight of swollen grief. Holy are fallen in flame, bidded, wild fenced lawns to kiln, a light crown of thorn plant and cauterized weeping lashes. Brother, this heat can't help but rise. Heart might billow smoke enough to suffocate. Brother, I might be lost if I forget where all this fire began. I have two more. One is about my relationship to religion and baptism. And the other one is going to be the poem from the anthology. And then I'll get out of the way and y'all can hear some poets much better than myself. My middle name is Christian. Before I could speak, I choked on odd water. Claimed by white priest and white God, God brought black by missionary, fettered, split skin. Odd God working strange magic while wicked men wielded all power and content with an action, Christ. Haven't we had enough white men idle as brown children die, as queer children die, enough young graves and lazy might? My middle name is Christian. I'll concede there's music to it, though it feels more brand than name. Evidence I can't escape his influence on every continent across, each where a priest or holyish man wielding terror in the name of God, I'll admit. I catch myself praying on turbulent flights. Still beg his mercy when I leave home. I know I'm in his nation, his children, watchful, halos tighten under pressure. They'll force one to my neck, string me up and even, but listen, please, listen. When I swing in his holiest light, don't let them say I found God. And after a little trilogy of poems that are kind of bummers, I'm going to read something a little bit more uplifting. This is kind of a new branch in my poetics. Specifically, I'm also a children's book writer for anyone out there unfamiliar with me. A lot of my hope and uplifting and joy tends to go towards the littles, and then poetry tends to be the space where I can let out some of those other emotions and the complexity involved with being hopeful, I'll say. But for this poem that's in a poetry anthology primarily aimed at young adults, I wanted to make sure that as they were moving through so much weight, so much heaviness, that they do have those little nuggets of hope. So this was my attempt to do so. This poem is dedicated to the Twin Cities, specifically the Ryman neighborhood. They tried to bury the neighborhood. But ain't we still here? Stubborn and lovely, so many dandelions sprouting fuzzy heads, catching wind and drifting skylines. Ain't they tried to sunder bud from stem? To pave lands we grow from, fragment and border, bury all that's soft and giving. Ain't we still here? Corralled by crosswalks, high rises, and I-94, ain't there more granola spots than ma shops and soil we made roots? Ain't dirt we sprang from turning dry, bitter, and stingy? Don't it take more than give? Names drifting tween breezes, autumn leaves, brought from distant land and oft, wigs blown back, still budding for false prophecies, spectricide boys, good and old, wilt groves to patches. But ain't we still here? Blooming through potholes, reaching for sun-touched skylines, digging toes in earth that's soft and giving. Ain't the elders teach us how to lay new roots, digging deep and spreading, coupling networks spell Floydtown, Castilleland, Wrightville, pavement cracked and buckling, new growth surging for fresh air. Ain't we still here? Thank you. Woo!
Let me say there's something about hearing your people speak when you can't very clearly. I realize sometimes with this anthology and talking about it, I think especially from having gone through the recent occupation of ICE, I think for me, I've struggled coming to this subject, and it's been difficult to be embodied. So I'm grateful for other voices, and that's why we need each other to kind of get rooted again. So thank you, Ty, and I'm so grateful for you and this anthology and all the great things that it's doing. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that this anthology is stacked with poets. And that ended up in like a pull quote in Publishers Weekly. They're like, this is stacked. Yes, it is stacked. But you know, we have so many folks who are local, and we'll talk about it more in the conversation later, but you know, so many amazing poets that are local and also national and are known in both ways and whatnot, and it's exciting. I'm jazzed to see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read my poem that was out. Oh man, this is in 2021 already. That was a long time ago. But I have a poem called "The Storyteller Gets Her Name," which was published here in 2021. The editors at the time, there was a few of our like Naomi Shihab and Nikki Grimes and Marguerite Engel, who many of them are former poet laureates for young people. And I got very lucky asked as a kid who hardly had a book deal to do this. And now this poem is taught in national ELA curriculum. It reaches about over 5 million different readers, which is wild, and it's been translated into Spanish. My only work that's been translated into Spanish. So I feel really lucky that this tiny little thing showed up elsewhere. But yeah, so it's not necessarily in conversation with like what Witness is about, but it is for young people, so in that way it is. Okay, so the storyteller gets her name. My dad used to call me Eagle Eyes. I was the one to find eagles, owls, blue jays on a dark day. He called me so until my brother was born infant and grew to boy. Having heard my name as younger siblings often do, he wanted to be called Eagle Eyes too. He studied the bird's flight, kept his eyes to the skies for hours, and soon he knew their long names and could correct me. Except at 16, I never liked to be corrected. But my brother showed me the work, and I learned to give him all I could, as my elders did for me. So I tightened my heart to let go, as I knew he had earned eagle eyes more than I ever could, and what I found instead was new room for a new name. I am Seawapool, storyteller, and my brother, he is Eagle Eyes. I tell his tales in rhyme, so someday when we join the elders, my stories may be told, and his birds can take to the sky. But for now, I will share with you my story so that you can know who you are and maybe you are seeing cool too. And I'm going to be kind of spare, I'm just going to read two. So the other poem, or the poem that I have in Witness is called Church. And it's part of Witness ended up having images as well alongside Damon's work. And so there are a few spreads that are black and white images of locations. And at first time I was like, no, like do we? But then I had this moment where I brought this anthology for the first time in its ARC form. This is not the final form. This is an advanced reader's copy. To a teaching festival or an event up north, and I was showing this book to a few educators, and there was one who was a student to be an educator, and she goes, "Oh, I made that sign," and she was it was her first active protest as a teenager, and it just gave all of us chills at the table, and I was like, this is one of the reasons why I made this anthology. Like, it's kind of speaking to those who have spoken as well, and it was just cool to see it seen, and I was like, okay, all right, I get the picture. Why we have these images. This is the work of other voices too. Okay, so this is called Church Prose Poetry. Okay, so it wasn't when my mother left me or my father died. It wasn't when the wind snapped the trees around my childhood house. We mourned for those trees for days. No, it wasn't even when that man kept breaking into my room. No, it was when I woke up and I could smell the ash through my open windows. When I couldn't watch the video, I couldn't pray. Lying on the floor, I couldn't protest, not to God or others. I didn't go places because if we left, we wondered if we'd make it home. Some of my friends almost got ran over by a semi. I couldn't pray for weeks when the entire world had things to say. Not until I woke up early, went to the corner, cut food. My home neighborhood, the humidity of the bodies who had been there the last night lingered. The ground near empty, someone meditating, another clearing wilted flowers. Then I stood at the bus stop, and I could see where he reached out. He prayed for people, they say. Inside the bus stop walls was stained glass with glued-on voices, pasted in every color, the light of the morning coming through. Voices grasping, and I was brought to church. What to say to God? That same officer was cruel to my friend. That my dad knew Georgie's girlfriend. That witness was a wrestling coach and his team competed against my nephews. Could tell you now I saw him a year later helping some kids on the side of the road. A woman in a Suburban parked ahead. When I drove by, he and I nodded at each other. My soul cracked open that day in a place of transience. Too much transience. I couldn't pray until I heard us home people crying from the walls themselves. Feel our weeping soaked into the heavy air. They had made for me a bus stop, a church bench, a spot to sit long enough to remember who God is near for anyway. A formal introduction is needed here. Okay, Tran Myhre is a poet, performer, and educator based in Minneapolis. He's been part of 2 National Poetry Slam Championships teams, been featured on a Grammy-winning album, and performed everywhere from the United Nations to the main stage of the largest protest in Minnesota history earlier this year at the Capitol, to countless colleges, high schools, and conferences. He also just wrapped up a 3-session workshop series right here at New City Center, specifically on creative writing for introverts. All right, thank you, Kyle.
I have to do this. Can we, one more time, make some noise for our editors? Yeah, and I appreciate you all being here. Like, I have a very impressive bio for someone who cannot draw an audience to a free show in my own city, but it is Memorial Day. And, it's also Memorial Day weekend. Historically, we also know it's not just Memorial Day, right? What is May 25th? There's all kinds of stuff happening at George Floyd Square right now. There's all kinds of stuff throughout the city. I feel like this is a beautiful event that is contributing to the larger conversation that is happening in the city now and has been happening since 2020 and has been happening since before 2020. And so there is so much I want to say about this book because like I knew it was going to be cool when they asked me to submit a poem, but like I didn't know it was going to be this good. I know it's a small intimate audience. We're going to just have a conversation in a minute, but like I really want to make the pitch that like if I were not in this book, if I did not know these people, if I had nothing to do with it, I would still use this book as an educator. I would, in every class I teach, the work is so good. I'm just going to read a couple of pieces. I'll start with my piece that's in the book, and then I want to juxtapose it with something else. It's called Watershed, a scene from the very near future. We arrive at the press conference just in time to see the city reaching over to shake hands with the robot officer with no hands. The city shakes. The cameras flash. The city standing so tall in that train station, so proud of his soundbite. The apples can't be rotten when they're made of steel. This is, of course, after the flood, and the other flood, and the other flood, and the other flood, after we traded our tiny basement apartment for the even tinier corner of a cousin's living room. The city doesn't patch the holes in its boots. The city doesn't spend money on improved drainage systems or rental assistance for families. The city hires a dozen new robo-cops, shiny and mindless, like rubber bullets the size of teenagers, like gym rat R2-D2s in Klan robes. The city takes a single reporter's question, but the scream of metal on metal is too much. All I hear is the repetition, that same forced smile, focused, grouped, concrete language quip. The apples can't be rotten when they're made of steel. Can't help but think the city is forgetting something important about apples. Can already feel the teeth loosening in my jaw, the ringing in the bite. Plant one of those in the ground. A tooth, a seed from a steel apple. A man rolling his eyes and see what grows. The city departs. Two assistants with black umbrellas battling to shield the never-ending rain from his single little head. And then it's just us and the empty egg, the $1 million sandbag. This is, of course, before the city learns that you need a bunch of flesh cops to guard the RoboCop, like who watches the watchman. Indeed, we step forward. It just sits there, not helping anyone or doing anything. Such fidelity, we step forward. It sees us through a camera. It hears us through a microphone. Always a border, nothing new, just progress. We step forward, a drone by any other name, a litany of all the rights for which we should be grateful. We step forward. Honestly, we were only there to heckle the thing, to take pictures and post funny captions. And I don't believe in big lightning strike eureka moments, but I know no one said anything clever. No one took a picture. The difference between full and flood is a drop, and we all felt it. The question departing, how loud do we have to be to get its attention? And arriving, how hard do we have to push to knock it onto the tracks? Yeah, so again, like we'll talk in a moment about the kind of science fiction, like futurist elements, and not just my piece, but some of the other pieces in here. Like if y'all know Janata's, can we please give the police department to the grandmothers? Like one of my favorite poems of all time and all of the canon, like one of the greatest poems ever is in this book. And like that one also has such a cool kind of future focus. taught a class here yesterday, right? That was right down the hall in a little classroom. We were talking about the idea of the anthemic impulse and like writing that deals with really serious political issues or social issues or issues that affect our lives and our families. And the idea of this anthemic impulse is like, we don't have to turn away from what is hard. We don't have to pretend like the traumatic, harmful things don't exist, but we can still, in our writing, center possibility. We can still center the agency that we have to do something about that stuff. And I think like, Janada's poem is one of my favorite examples ever, but like it's also, you can hear it a little bit in mine, like trying to open that door. Like I think poems and creative writing can open doors, which sounds very obvious and kind of like a platitude, but I think it's a really, really, really important thing to try to internalize. Like, how is our writing opening rather than closing doors for people to enter into this issue? I'm talking too much. Let me just do one more poem, and then we'll have a little conversation. I think I have this memorized. Again, in the classroom, we were talking about the kind of tools, not rules idea of when you're talking about a specific issue like abolition or like policing and punishment. There are pros and cons to being really, really blunt or being really, really kind of like metaphorical and figurative, right? It's not that one or the other is bad or good. It's that they're just different tools, different approaches. And one reason this is such a cool book is that it's an anthology. You get to see all these different poets with all their different approaches. And like, some of the poems are very, very clearly like, this is an abolition poem. And some of them are not, right? Like, you could make, the poem that I just performed, you could maybe read and hear different things in it. And I wanted to share an example of a poem that kind of is on the other end of the spectrum for me, of being like, sometimes you just have to say the thing, and like that's okay. It doesn't have to be a metaphor, sometimes you just have to say the thing. So I wrote this, it's a song. I wrote it at the same time I wrote this poem. So it would have been like 2023, 2024, sometime in that general area. Coming from the same experiences of experiencing Minneapolis in 2020, the uprising, being part of the MP150 project, which I can talk more about later. But then the song also references a different song that was written in 2015. So making the point that like abolitionist work has been happening in this community for a very long time. Like not just in 2015, 16, 17, before the uprising, but even further back than that. Like we're connected to so many incredible people who've done this work before us. And so I'll shut up and I'll share the song. This is called It's the End of Their World as They Know It. The city's underwater, no money for all the work because the mayor's shaking hands with a robot officer and the cops got money for fill in the blank, assault rifles and tanks, drones, chemical weapons, $1 million settlements, PR campaigns, don't read a land acknowledgement before you sentence him, but no change in the landscape. Community is medicine and prison isn't even a band-aid. I thought this was a song about climate. Well, how do you define it? Because look, those who turn hoses on water protectors are those who cage stop Cop City protesters and enforce the brutality of the border. Same ones who enforce bans on drag performers. Same ones who enforce bans on crossing state lines for abortions. Some of those who work forces are the same that burn crosses, are the same that burn everything for the bosses. It's the end of their world as they know it, and I feel nothing. When I was born, everybody smoked cigarettes, and social media wasn't invented yet. I made it through high school without a cell phone, and my first LP sold 100 CDs and 0 downloads. And I will remind you, I'm not that old. This world we pretend to know is not set in stone. In 2015, I made a song with some friends. If you remember it, sing along. It went, one bad cop is a problem, but one bad cop is not the problem. One bad department's a problem, but one bad department is not the problem. One bad politician is a problem, but one bad politician is not the problem. And if we don't see the whole picture, we treat the symptoms and keep getting sicker. But now consider, at the time, that felt radical. 5 years later, abolition's Instagrammable. So picture 5 years from now. How about another 5? Wonder why they want to ban books? Because imagination isn't enough to change anything, but it's the foundation to changing everything. So tell your story. Imagine us victorious over police, prisons, and pollution. Radical solutions might feel futuristic, but in 5 years will be the common sense position. If we fight here right now with this vision, if we eat the cookie with the fortune still in it, no future with the ones on our tongues, no cages, no handcuffs, no flood, but us. Paint picture that you want to see yourself in change is inevitable, nothing else is. It's the end of their world as they know it. Before I bring up our other two readers tonight, just a really quick shout out. For those of you, I have a bunch of zines in the back. There's little free booklets, and specifically one of them is from the Everyone for Free Project. So like, if you're new to abolition, this is like one of the best things you can read. It's like a frequently asked questions, like, well, what if we just got rid of all the cops? Like, wouldn't there be more crime? Like, just like the very natural questions people have, as well as recommended readings. So some of the best writing from the post-uprising, like 2020, 2021 era. Really, really incredible stuff you can find online. Quotes and then links to them. So this is a really, really good resource, as well as some book recommendations. Really quick, this is also a zine specifically about the last 6 months of resistance here in Minnesota, how artists and culture workers have been contributing to that resistance. A bunch of really good resources if you are a writer or a creative in some way, or just looking to find good examples of poems that have come out of the last 6 months. A lot of good stuff in here. And this is just like my business card, so that's what we do. Thank you. Shall we? Very informal, right? Have a conversation?
Ari, do you just want to move the podium out the way just a few feet now that? Perfect. And
Shout out to all the people on the live stream too. We see you.
you're fine there, but yeah, perfect. If you wanted to move the chairs, you could, or whatever. Now that things out the way.
Howdy.
I'm super jazzed to be up here, and thank you for reading and your voices. So I think what we're going to do is kind of collective. We each brought a few questions to kind of throw around, but also too we want to hear from y'all. So I think we'll probably make some room for that after chatting. If you have questions or things you want to talk about, we can do that too. Yeah. So I'm wondering kind of maybe rudimentary, but I know all of us write for adults as well as writing, or have written now for children. And I wonder if, working on your piece for this anthology or as an editor, how it changed the work, how did it transform, how did you have to think about young people, or how, what was your perspective on young people, and how did that shape then what you created?
Yeah, on that. Well, first I'll just say I love the order we did the readings. I've had to follow Kyle once in my life, and never again. Never again.
I'm just loud.
Yeah, to answer the question though, writing my poem, working on this book, and also some other pretty core experiences I've had in the last couple of years really actually not only changed my approach and how I write to children, but changed my approach to the poetics themselves. I think in my early career as a poet, I spent a lot of time being like, hey, did you know things are bad actually? Which is interesting to a point. But I think I'm really concerned with the question of so what now, right? Like things are bad, so what are we gonna do about it? Like how do we create a world that isn't bad? How do we instill hope, whether it be in young people or adults? Like I mentioned earlier, I tend to be a little less careful in how I write to adults sometimes, but I think we're just as needing of hope. So I think as we were compiling Witness and getting all of these beautiful poems, some of which were dealing with personal traumas, some of which were dealing with intergenerational trauma, examples of policing that were deeply damaging, it became of paramount importance to me that we not sugarcoat it or lighten it or shy away from that reality, but offer balance and offer opportunities for the young reader to breathe and reflect and remember that they're safe before wading back into those waters again.
That's really good. Like I love how you frame that. it speaks to this bigger idea that within writing as a practice, like there's a room for all kinds of different approaches. You don't necessarily owe the audience anything. Like there's room for cynicism. There's room for kind of like the Afro-pessimist tradition, which has such a rich history within poetry. And that stuff is valid. Like sometimes pointing to the bad thing over there and saying, hey everyone, that's bad. Like that's a valid thing. It's one function of art. But one thing we talk about, and you kind of allude to this, but like in the workshop yesterday, a lot of the workshops that I facilitate, we talk about, you may not owe your reader anything, but like you can think about it. Like you can think like, what do I want to leave the reader with? And that question I think is doubly, triply, quadruply important when you are working with young readers. And like you said, you want to plant those seeds of possibility, and not just like, yeah, you're right, the world's terrible. And like, it is terrible. I mean, there is a little bit of a both and there. But yeah, my only addition to that question about what writing for a younger audience is very like micro level stuff. I think not so much changing what I would say to any audience for a younger audience, but kind of like line-edit stuff, like working with the editors, y'all, was really useful about like, oh, you know, this specific phrase might be something older people get, younger people don't, right? Like really little things like that. And I love the kind of micro level mechanics of a project like this.
I think, you know, as I feel like for myself, and probably why I am more drawn to writing for children and young adults, and that tends to be where my space is that I think I'm, by nature, like pretty accessible, like I'm pretty narrative. Also, free read tradition is very spare, like it's not flowery. It kind of says things how it is, and because of that nature, it can be memorized and survive extreme colonization. So there's elements, I think, of my own work that I've had to recognize that, you know, sometimes it's like, oh man, I love like a beautifully complex poem, and I joke jazz by it and the word choices and all that, and then I'm like, oh, here's me in my narrative tradition. I teach poetry, so I, you know, I was pharmaceutical in the room too. Like, I love all those elements, and then I find out that it always ends in my own poetics, it ends up being narrative. And something that probably is in some, maybe not this one, but my other one. I mean, I've had a young person come up to me and be like, oh, I memorized this poem, how did you both saints? And I was like, what? But again, that's my point. It's like, it's more, it's just like, it's accessible, maybe easier for memory type thing. But yeah, so I think for me too, I think I wasn't necessarily thinking about writing for the young person specifically, but I think that sometimes my poetics leans that way because it is more accessible and more narrative. And sometimes we're a little bit more used to that. It kind of cracks the door open to more beautiful poems in the world. So I think that for me too, that tends to be where I end up, which is kind of is also an honor because I think young people are I was just crying about, because I'm going to go talk to some young folks tomorrow, and I was just crying thinking about that in the world that they have, and what do I want to equip them with, what do I want to tell them, how can I think about them in the room, think about them as people. It's a young writer conference, and so I'm thinking about all these young writers specifically, and how am I supporting them and giving them hope and steaming them. So I do think sometimes when we are writing for young people, there is that part of wanting to see them as well. And sometimes that means just being really vulnerable, because when we are vulnerable, then that gets mirrored back. I've noticed that for myself. If I'm able to give my pain to people, they're able to mirror that back to me, especially young people. And so I think that's definitely part of my poetics too, in this one specifically, that I wanted to lay down some things so that they could feel vulnerable and be in that space with me. So yeah, do y'all have a question that you want to chat about?
Yeah, I mean, I have like specific questions, one for you and one for Kyle. I wanted to ask you, Ari, about your experience with the timing of the release of this book. I won't go into like the full story because we'll be here for a while. But Ari and I have been working on this book since 2021. Yeah. Like that was when we first had the idea for the book. Neither of us had books out yet. We were both set to be published. We were young authors with a whole lot of gumption. We're gonna get all these award-winning authors to do a book with us, and it's gonna be great, and everyone's gonna love it. It's gonna change the world. And it's been a really long process. And initially, we imagined this book as kind of a love letter to George Floyd specifically. It was 2021. Not that pain ever goes anywhere, but things were very fresh. And we have not seen this book come out until 2026.
And that idea didn't sell for the big five.
No, that idea did not sell. No,
Yeah.
we ended up changing things and making it a broader conversation about policing and making that conversation accessible to young people. Because I think it's one of the many conversations we say, the kids don't need to, they don't have thoughts and opinions, they don't need to hear them. I'm curious what your experience has been starting this work in 2021 and then having it released in the current climate of 2026. I don't want to hand you an answer, but I mean, it's unfortunately more timely than ever, right? So I'm just curious your ruminations on that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of resonating with what I was saying about like how these movements of abolition, these movements of just like caring for other human have been around for a long time. Like, and so I think that, you know, I guess I'm careful. I feel like Ty and I have these conversations so really, but like, you know, so that it's interesting, like, you know, bringing this into a space where there's educators, where I think if we weren't in the current climate, they all wouldn't necessarily be flocking to it, right? But now, the current with the climate, then they are wanting to read this book, and we need this one there, like, and they know these. They know Amanda Gorman's poem, for, you know what I mean, right? About ice, right? So there's these kind of like through lines to this moment, exactly this present time. But then also I kind of love that already in our title we have a reminder of the past and a thought about the future too. And so I think it's one, kind of like how I felt in the moment during Uprising, where I'm like, man, Minneapolis has always been Minneapolis. We've been mourning if a tree falls over, we'll mourn it for weeks, right? Like, it's not like we're caring people. Like, so if something happens in our community, of course we're going to be there. And my dedication has always been to Minneapolis, right? Like, I grew up less than a mile from where George Floyd was murdered. Like, this is just like my home, right? So to have the whole world talk about it and give resonance to it is important, but also that I think one of my visions for this book is that we would have local poets that were speaking to the space, because we needed to speak to, and also have the recognition that this has been going on for a long time, not out of a place of pride, but like out of places like join us, really, right? So I don't know. I mean, it's been quite the journey, because it's hard to see the waves return and that reality of kind of getting older and seeing how this is cyclical. Like, it's not gonna go away with certain, moments or people getting big in their feelings for a hot second. Like it's painful in that way. I feel like older because of it, but also like, I guess I am grateful to have a work out there that is specific and believe in the literature that like Brooker's had, that it does have resonance, and the voice is powerful. So I don't know. I mean, I'm talking all over the place, but I feel like it's been super hard. We've had difficulties with our publisher, and I don't shy away with that. I actually talk about it pretty openly because I think it's important to. I'm not really afraid of. I mean, why would I censor myself on a book on censorship? Even if it's a publisher that had intentions and possibly successful censorship that they did even on this book. Like, so it's there's things like that too, where our publisher was down for something and then they weren't down for something, and then they were down for something and then they weren't down for something. And so like even the title has gotten changed how many times? Like even the subheading was going to get changed a week before it went to print. And so we had to get our agent to like show up and back for us about the title itself. It was going to be like nothing on the title, basically, like an poetry anthology. That was the subheading that they wanted. So like we were like, no, like and the cool part about this, I'm gonna go to you too. The cool part about this though was that in that moment, I really saw like, hey, here's our list of local poets, our list of national poets, our list of people that have won huge awards, our people of abolitionists that are in the paint, right? Like all these things, like, and all of them would be super pissed off
more. So it felt like a communal flex of being like, we're not doing that, and I told our agent, like, we're not, like, I was like, here's the thing, like, if they push for it, we will just talk to the poets, and they will be mad, and then it'll be really clear, like, we're not gonna change it, or we're gonna not do what we're doing, you know? And so I think about that too, like that community work, like we're in-house, there's wars that are going on, and also at the same time seeing collectivity kind of win, which is kind of beautiful. That was a long answer. I have feelings about that.
As do I.
But I do think it's important not to censor ourselves. I think sometimes we do because of being fearful about publication or thinking about what is my career going to do. But I'm not really willing to do that for myself in my place. But,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right.
Yes, I did have a question for Kyle as well. You have been writing boldly about civil rights, human rights, social justice, whatever the term is we want to use for it, just generally being a good person and caring about things. You've been writing on those topics for a number of years. Like you were my first, you led my first poetry workshop. Yeah. I was a little 16-year-old writing really, really not good poems. But like, so you've been engaged with this work for a time, and I'm curious if how your approach to the work, how your poetics, how your methodology and philosophy around it has shifted over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that old. I think some of it is what I was talking about earlier in the workshop, where we talk about this kind of spectrum or continuum between just say the thing that you want to say, and then like on the other side, like push boundaries, be weird and metaphorical. And again, both sides are great. I think the older I get, the more experienced I get doing this work. I sometimes actually lean more towards the just say the thing you want to say side of it. That also comes from performance. Like my background in poetry is not publishing. Like I kind of skipped the whole like submitting to journals and magazines step of the process, because I perform, I travel around and share it out loud, and you know, to be able to build a relationship with the audience through those, like, you know, the one line that isn't super poetic but everyone loves, you know, like that happens a lot. But it's also a function of performing less. I want to connect this back to the book. So like writing and performing less about my own kind of self-expression, and like that's beautiful, that's an important function of an artistic practice, but for me, in the place in my life that I'm at, it's less about like expressing myself and more about trying to create work that is useful in some way. And you know, people don't have to agree with that. Like that's kind of a controversial thing. Like I don't really care if a poem is good. I like a poem to be useful. And that's one thing that is mind-boggling to me about this book, is how useful it's going to be for not just teachers and educators and people who like talk about this stuff all the time, but I think for a lot of people, it's going to, like we said before, kind of open doors. I'm really excited to see this in people's hands this fall.
I've got a question, well, for maybe both of y'all, if you want to speak into it, but I'm curious because one of the exciting things that we talked about before too, I was so jazzed because your work has this element of, I mean, at least when I thought like futurism or like sci-fi elements that really make us kind of like think about the future, right, in a certain capacity. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a bit in relationship to policing and how you, because you read 2 poems of that stage, so yeah, I wondered if you just wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would also tie the science fiction element and the futurism element back to this concept of the anthemic impulse. Like, how do you talk about the bad thing while also centering agency and possibility? And like science fiction historically has, like, think about like Star Trek, right? Like how much of Star Trek is about this utopian society. You know, it has its problems. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but just as one example of a broader trend within science fiction of, like I said, I keep saying acknowledging the bad things while also centering what is possible. I'm really interested in that. And I think, especially in an anthology of writing primarily for younger people, I also think it just makes it fun and like outside the box and interesting. And I say fun also for me as a writer. Like it gives me kind of, it helps me be disciplined as a writer to know that the thing that I'm writing is kind of like fun, if that makes any sense. And the science fiction stuff is definitely part of that.
Well, and I think it's interesting that, you know, for Minnesota, even just like the emblem of balloon, right? Like very much heralding YA. That did not come out that long ago, right? Like Hunger Games, right? And so I think sometimes we discount sci-fi or futurism, thinking that it's kind of not real. But then oftentimes it's, as in the case that we saw, like these are the tools that we then are able to use and apply and think about it, right?
I don't want to talk too much about Janata. We saw her earlier today, but her poem is, I think, a great example also of like how science fiction does not have to be robots and laser guns, right? Like science fiction can also just be envisioning the future. And like her poem is so warm and full of like food and music and like humanity. And I think that's also a really cool vision of science fiction. And from the little bit I've been able to page through the advanced copy, like that feels like a really cool thrill. And I don't know how much of that was intentional for you too, or it just kind of magically happened. But like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was, I think, an effort for us to, to find pieces that would fit in that category. And like, I mean, our last poem by Michael it's definitely a great example of thinking about sci-fi and a more like earthy,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely that was, I think it was a little bit of labor and a little bit of luck. And that we so like we put out a call to people of like, hey, like we're really interested in including your poems in this anthology. This is sort of what we're working with here. If you have any poems that address policing, be it directly or in a more sort of indirect manner, policing via censorship. There's one poem in there that sort of speaks on how a woman's experience of religion really policed her. There's a lot of ways that we allowed our writers to take it. Encouraged our writers to take it. Yeah. But so we certainly encourage people to submit poems that dealt with futurism if they had them. At the same time, it was a matter of once we put out those calls, once we got those poems from people, just looking at this mess of poems on the table and being like, all right, where are the through lines? How do we organize this? How do we make this a cohesive reading experience for a young person and not just a bunch of poems that got stapled together? So I think it was a little bit of column A, column B.
I don't know if you have a question or if we should move along. Yeah. Anyone want to chat or have a question?
I feel like it's almost harder to share in an intimate space sometimes. Yeah.
I just kind of came in off the street. I was having a meeting upstairs, and I'm not in the poetry circle, but I am really drawn to the social justice parts of the poems that were read. And I'm a writer, I'm a journalist. Research I do, the things that I care about don't have a big audience either, But I guess what I'm curious about is how you think about, take it back. I was really involved with things like trying to talk about my free pipeline, and I really appreciated like how important the visual artists were in that work, and how that really was powerful, and the musicians who kept people going. Poetry is much more ephemeral. There might have been some spoken word, but not a lot. I'm just curious about how you see, for poems to make a difference. How do you see your work kind of being impactful in that arena, and kind of what change are needed? Because the way I think about poetry, it's fairly niche. You don't see a lot of people coming, and that's not a criticism. That's just kind of a comment on society. Last thing I'll say is I was also really impressed. So many people my age thought that they had to do like go on the front lines and get arrested to be meaningful in the movement. I really appreciate that. There's so many ways that people get involved from visual art to cooking to a lot of other things. And I see poetry in that vein. I think I thought of that in my comment.
I don't want to talk too much, but I'm literally, next week I'm going to Netroots, the big national conference, to facilitate a workshop on how artists and culture workers, and especially poets, contributed to the mutual aid work and also just the general kind of anti-ICE resistance work over the last 6 months. And so this is a question that's been on my mind constantly, and I think one of the biggest takeaways is that there have been, a couple poems that have gone super viral. Ali, who's in the anthology, had the most unbelievable poem called Land in 10,000 Lakes. My little blue scene that I mentioned links to a bunch of really cool poems. And there's others too I can mention, but one of the big takeaways is that it's very rarely about a single poet or single poem that like magically wakes everyone up. It is very much that kind of anthology approach, the anthological approach of many voices talking about the same topic at the same time, and it creates this kind of wave of discourse. And there may not be one poem that is particularly successful, but when that happens, it does kind of sink into other parts of the culture workspace, but then also organizing spaces, which tend to be connected, hopefully, to culture workers. And like, there's a cool thing, and again, and not just poets either, the fact that poets and visual artists and other kinds of artists and culture workers were all doing this work at the same time. It was incredible to see over the last 6 months. But that's one entry point to that question. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this question is fascinating to me because it's in conversation with a question I get a lot of, sort of what is, for lack of better wording right now, like what is the use of children's literature in a world where they are so dialed in on Instagram and Roblox and Fortnite, et cetera, et cetera. And like we very much are in a huge literary crisis right now. A lot of these babies cannot read. Is the reality of the situation right now. And so when I think about Witness and what it has the potential to do, I think a lot about libraries and schools. I think about teachers who are going to use this work either to study poetry, because you have some significant names in this anthology speaking to these issues, or to speak about policing directly if a teacher feels called to do so and has the wiggle room to do so. So I see, my first book that I published was called Sarah Rising. It was about a little girl getting lost at a protest after a black person was murdered by the police. I think I did a lot of thinking at that time too of like, well, what good is it? Like, what is this gonna do? Why am I writing a picture book for like little kids about police brutality? And what it ended up being was a tool for adults to engage in conversations with young people. I had so many parents come up to me and say like, I didn't have the words for how to have this conversation. Like sometimes black parents would come up to me and be like, I didn't know how to have this conversation with my daughter. Like, I'm terrified for her and I didn't want to have this conversation, but your book helped me do that. And so when I think about poetry's space in the resistance, when I think about poetry's place in change making and literature's place in change making, I think it's a tool. I think it's a resource for people to use, either to learn or to have conversations with others.
Well, and I think too, like, I mean, another part of this anthology that, you know, I mean, I do joke that it's tech, but it is in the way that, and part of that was intentional, right? There's some circles that Tran Myhre are close to that we could reach into some national spaces, right? And see if, for example, we have 2 Newbery winners in here that I happen to know were writing poetry. And Newbery, they're one of the biggest awards you can get for children's literature, right? And they have a huge audience, right? So huge. And so if you can tap into some of those audiences, right, then we're now reaching all the more folks. And so I think some of that was intentional, right? Like we kind of took a little risk, like, all right, we're going to take some baby poets that are also Newbery winners and see what we can do. And that there's an avenue. And they wrote really amazing stuff. There's incredible work that came out of that. So there's some like strategy too, even though I believe in a poem in a quiet sense, but also, you know, much sense too. Yeah.
Just one more thing. It's such a good question, and so just one more thing I want to add to the pile is that frankly, like, I don't believe writing is enough. I think it's a piece of it. I think a lot about Denez Smith's work and bluff. In that poetry collection, Denez asks a lot of difficult questions about like, what is writing in the face of all this? Like, what is luxuriating on my woes and my concerns and my griefs and all these things in the heart of such atrocity, or in the face rather of such atrocity? And I think, again, I think that writing has a place and has a potential, a high potential to impact people on a deep level. And then hand in hand with that, like, you know, I'll speak for myself. I was on the front lines, like, for certain moments. So I think both can happen, and it doesn't have to be either or. Yeah.
pick it up and read it. But I do think it does, I mean, in our letter to the reader, that we do address the young person. But that doesn't necessarily dictate that the whole book has to be consumed. Like that's who you are as the reader. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to that more. But.
Now I feel like I'm talking too much. All right, yeah.
We're
I'll
all like, wait, I'm
Bashful poets. I have a couple of thoughts on that. One, I think currently we're in a place that largely I think thanks to book talk, where adults are reading books meant for young adults, marketed for young adults more than ever before. So I think that's a piece of it. I'm a firm believer that well-crafted children's media is appropriate and applicable for everyone. My wonderful partner Whitney is here in the audience. We watched all of Bluey front to back. It's a show for developing young people, 3 to 5, but it's masterfully written, and it gets at some of the core hurts and growing pains of humanity that are so universal. And so I think, and I could list, as a children's book author, I could list off so much media that I think is really appropriate for adults as well. But I think if the work has a solid enough emotional core and is crafted with intention, it can be appropriate for anyone. I think what the anthology for young adults, what it looks like in practice is that we spend a lot of time thinking about, one, how we selected poems. There are some poems that aren't in this anthology that were sent to us, and they're not in it because the poems felt inaccessible for a young person. And I won't name names, but some folks were less willing to edit their work than others. So name names. So I think when I think about the Witness, that poetry anthology for young adults, where that was most relevant was in the crafting of it. Now that it's in the world, I think it's for everyone.
I just wouldn't want adults to not pick it up because they thought it was.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
that's a great point.
Naomi, you mentioned Naomi Chapman.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a perfect example of universal.
Yeah.
She writes for young people.
Yeah.
We need it.
Well, it's a valid concern, and I think something that we can take into consideration as we're engaging in conversations around the book.
Just as you market it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wouldn't be explicit, just I would be afraid my peers wouldn't pick it up.
Yeah, that's really helpful information. Well, and I think too, oftentimes the reading space or something like that, the people that we might draw are adults, right? But the marketing team or our publisher is going to send it, is going to be for young people directed at. So there's kind of multiple folks.
Maybe too.
Yeah. All right.
An interesting dissonance, though.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
All right, well, should we close?
Yeah, unless there's any lingering questions, unless someone's in the crowd like, oh no.
Yeah, fair enough. We can just keep it.
All